And my name is Brintha Koether, and I am with the Amazon Web Services. I am the EMEA IoT segment lead, and I am delighted to be with you here today to talk about inclusive leadership, particularly in remote working environments. So with that, let me get started. So when we talk about inclusive leadership, we want to first start by getting to know each other. So let's all relax a little bit and just, if you can, in your window, just kind of say hello, say where you're from, maybe something else about yourself, of what your experience today or what your mood is. And that's really one of the first things that we need to think about when we think about inclusion, is that even though we're all together on screen, we may all be in different places in our mind and from the call that we've just come from, and especially in working from home environments, even what might be happening on behind us in our household. So just take a moment to check in with everyone, make sure everybody's where they need to be and ready for the call and ready to be able to participate. That's one of the first things to do when we're working from home, and making sure everyone is included. Then I think the next thing here, and as I said, feel free to put whatever you can in there. Happy to see these things coming up in the screen there. And then the next thing is really thinking about our needs and our important needs. And what I'm going to do here is just talk to you about the Maslow hierarchy of needs. And really, when we talk about these needs, let's start from the bottom. And I think COVID, and particularly everyone in this pandemic, has really been struggling with the bottom two, right? Psychological needs for safety, security, and just everyone's well-being has really been shaken during this time. And as we're all starting to move into living with COVID, I wouldn't say moving out of it, but living with COVID and the pandemic, we need to just make sure that everybody's in a place where they can be participating in discussions in a way that they want to be participating and being fully present. So, be sure that you're checking in and looking first that everybody's physically there and physically able to participate. And then it's about the psychological needs of really recognizing where people are in their emotional journey. Sometimes through this, we're going through different waves of this virus and what that might mean in different locations, particularly when it comes to restrictions or how family is affected, how different people are affected, and just recognizing that people are going to be dealing with this with ups and downs, right? And that's going to go on for some time. So I think it's really, really important to recognize the psychological needs that people have as they're dealing with this as well. And just, taking a moment to acknowledge that, right? Everyone processes this experience in different ways. And I think it's important that we're able to acknowledge that. And then lastly, looking at that self-fulfillment and really looking at what people are trying to achieve. Because even though we're living with this pandemic, we need to recognize that we're still humans, we're still moving on in our personal development, professional development, and we have goals and desires and ambitions that we all want to achieve for ourselves. And then looking at how we can support one another in that journey in this time. For many people, this has been a fantastic time. They've really been able to focus on the areas that are most important to them in their personal and professional development, whether it's health and well-being and being able to take care of that time to spend with family, or being able to go outside more and take walks, or whatever it may be, that this is really, really important to people as part of their own self journey. So just kind of think about where people may be, and that we're looking at all of their needs as we're interacting with our colleagues and with our teams across the globe. And then we need to think about, particularly in the context that we're talking about today, in terms of sales leadership and being in a sales organization, about being an inclusive and effective leader. And why that's important is many, many different reasons. There's a lot of studies out there about why effective teams and diversity matters for organizations. But, from a leadership perspective, we need to think about what that means for us. One of the first things is about curiosity as a leader. And this is about demonstrating that you are curious to learn about other people, curious to learn about their situations, curious about understanding where people are coming from. And this is really a chance through curiosity to show some empathy. And then the other is cultural intelligence. So recognizing that people are coming from different backgrounds, may be physically obvious, may not be physically obvious, and that it's important to recognize that there's always cross-cultural interactions, and to be confident and effective in recognizing that just because there are differences doesn't mean that one way is perhaps the dominant way, but recognizing that people have different ways of getting their points across, and being able to recognize and actually help others to recognize that different people have different ways of communicating. And then another aspect is being collaborative, and this is really, really important. Highly inclusive leaders really empower individuals, and that's really, really important here, especially in this environment that we're living, which is a remote environment. People are working longer hours, as we've seen. They're working, from very different locations and different circumstances. So none of this working together has really taken on a new meaning. So none of the ways of collaborating are quite the same, of sitting together in the same room and cracking jokes. It needs to be done by building up trust and building up those relationships to work together. And that's what good leaders do, is just foster ways to collaborate, making sure the quiet ones on the call have a chance to participate. And like here, some people feel more comfortable using the chat features or raising their hands to be able to recognize that, make sure that people are collaborating and contributing to the conversation. Then some of the other things that we think about is really about competence, and really thinking about being mindful of the personal circumstances that people are in, and really, trying to make sure that you don't have any blind spots. And this is hard, right? It takes a lot of practice, I would say, for leaders to recognize when they have biases and how to overcome their biases, and being very much aware and deliberate about how one navigates their way through these conversations. And I think that's, that's part of the learning process, and it makes us all better leaders and better humans, right? And then another one is really about courage, right? About being inclusive and not being ashamed of that. It's really about being humble in the way that we're able to bring people on board into the conversation, help people share their thoughts and feelings, be welcome, and be recognized as contributors. And then I think the last leadership trait is about commitment, and inclusive leaders need to be committed to being inclusive. And that means sometimes, taking feedback from the team where one might have overlooked something, and just, not beating oneself up about it, but recognizing, okay, those things happen, and we move on, and just being aligned with your personal values around what that means to be an inclusive leader. So, these are some of the things that we really like to think about when we talk about inclusion and diversity. So I think sometimes it's always hard to talk about inclusion and diversity and equity and then really know what it looks like. It's one of these things that sometimes it's hard to describe, but you can feel it. And I think that's something that I want to try to explain here. So one of the first tenets is about being valued. And what I mean by that is that people are actually recognized, and that they have a feeling that their contributions are valued as part of the team. Now, this could be done from simple things like having shout outs in team calls to recognize people and their contributions, through to dropping people a specific note, or giving them a separate call and some feedback about how their contribution really made a difference in a discussion. So, you know, that's really important for people to be seen and to be valued. The next one is about being connected. So the degrees of connectedness between oneself and one's teammates. And that comes through multiple ways, right? I think we all have so many different channels that we can communicate, whether it's directly in a conference, via email, via Slack, or any other type of messaging system. So it's really important that people feel connected, that when we start a meeting or start any type of discussion with colleagues, that we're really forming that connection just for the moment or two, like we normally would in a live situation, by doing that also in a virtual situation. And then I think one of the other ones is about being informed. And I think this comes to a lot of the tools that have been made available now in this remote working environment. I mean, everyone is able to have far more access to documents and information and sharing files. You know, it's really important that people get the information, that is cascaded down. Sometimes it may feel like too much information, but then it's really about being concentrated and being very concerted in one's efforts as a leader to make sure people have had time to digest information, can ask questions, and are able to have enough information to make decisions and are trusted to make those decisions. And trust is really, really important for any type of relationship. So I save that for the last, not because it's the least important, but actually because it's fundamental to everything that we do in our jobs. If we're not trusted to do our job properly, then that gives us a lot of anxiety about working remotely and also fulfilling our roles and our ambitions and kind of moving up that Maslow hierarchy of needs, as I explained before. So it's really, really important that we're able to provide trust both as leaders and provide trust as teammates to one another. And that, you know, that comes from kind of practicing all of these areas of being valued, connected, and informed, and reinforcing that trust. So let's take a moment to talk about emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence is really about understanding our own feelings. And what's important about understanding our own feelings is it helps us to better understand those of others. It helps us to understand our own motivations, our own emotions, and also to recognize that when we see that in other people. And it helps us to focus on that being a way to manage relationships, meaning that we recognize both how we're feeling as well as how others are feeling. What that enables is that enables us to earn trust. And that's one of our leadership principles here at Amazon, is earn trust. How that manifests itself, particularly from a leadership perspective, is really about leaders listening attentively. And that means really paying attention to what someone's saying, what they might be saying, both with their words as well as with their body language or with their expressions. You know, speaking candidly about how one feels or what one is trying to express. It's not about criticizing others, but really speaking from your own mind and your own ideas. And that allows us to be respectful towards others because we're focusing on our view. And that's really, really important when we talk about being in a leadership position and helping others to feel comfortable and really being able to build that trust and extend ourselves into that relationship. And I think the other thing that's really important as a leader is being really, really self-critical and being willing to take back the criticism from others as well. So leaning into some of that awkwardness or even those embarrassing situations where one could say, you know what, I think I might have inadvertently done something or said something, and you know, let me just see how I can raise that topic and try to clear the air and learn from it, because I think that's one area where people are willing to extend trust. If someone's saying, you know, I think I might have screwed up here. How can I do better? And that's a far better way to improve that relationship than to not even put that on the table. So these are some of the things that one can think about as we talk about earning trust and what that does in those relationships. So here we want to talk about some of the things that help us build our emotional intelligence. So if we go through this, one of the first areas is around self-awareness and recognizing how we affect other people. It's really, really important that we have our own ideas and values in check, recognizing where our own biases may be or where our own blind spots may be. It helps us to get into those conversations and be a little bit more vulnerable. Another area is around the self-management, as I was talking about before. Recognize that we can have our emotions, they can upset us, we can feel distracted in the moment, but rather than letting them take control of our behavior, saying, I recognize that, how do we move forward here, and being able to think about how to address that more constructively. And then social awareness, being aware of what's happening around you and happening in the interpersonal relationships of your team. I think that's also really, really important, and recognizing how the conversation is moving, what may be hindering it, what may be making people feel awkward, and kind of unlocking some of those conversations is really, really important as well. And then, really looking at the relationship management, both in the relationships that we have one-on-one, as well as the relationships that we have as a team, and the relationships that we have to other people in our organizations, whether it be customers or partners that we're working with. That it's really important to look at all of these things and see that we're true to our values and true to our intent around inclusion and diversity, and making sure that we're bringing all of people's best skills to play in our different conversations as we're in a working environment. And so how do we do that? This is really, everybody has different ways of building relationships, but it's a virtuous cycle how we do this. And it's really, about the relationships, focusing that these are key things to success, recognizing that there are introverts, there are extroverts, there are people who are data driven, there are people who are emotionally driven. Just recognizing there's a lot of diversity in how people express themselves, recognizing that and being open to that helps to establish a lot of trust. And we set the tone as leaders in that trust building. Focusing on face-to-face relationships, even when it's on video or however you can do that, focusing on, open communications and really trying to build the environment, even in a virtual space, that people can talk, people can express themselves, people are valued, people's contributions matter in a discussion, and emphasizing, how we're all working together towards achieving results. Always really important from a leadership perspective that one can bring all of these different factors and different ways of managing people into the discussion, into whatever work we may be doing. So why does remote working make it harder to be inclusive? Now, I'd love to hear what different people have experienced over this time. Please drop that in the chat box. We want to understand, what other people are experiencing. And I bet as we read through some of these, we'll see that people are experiencing a lot of the same things that they think makes it harder to be inclusive. There's a lot of different barriers, whether it may be technical, whether it may be physical, whether it may be, the things happening in the room that other people on the screen can't see in the background. So there's a lot of different things happening around there. So, here's sort of a list, as I said, of some of the things that could be happening, right? The less of a team connection or a disengagement. You know, just like in a physical environment, people need to have those regular conversations. They need to have the different ways of communicating whatever is right for your company, whether it's, you know, having the instant messages or the emails or the calls, or the broadcast messages, whatever it may be. You know, people need to feel connected by having these regular discussions. The other is internet connectivity, video. You know, that's really interesting to see. Sometimes it can be fatigue from being on video for a while, and that's all right. You know, some people are able to have those conversations with each other as they're going for a walk. If it's a one-on-one conversation, it ends up being a really great conversation. So, you know, recognize what are the different ways that different people in different situations can connect and still be part of the conversation. And I think the other thing is, you know, looking at reaching out to different people, whether it's in your organization or in other types of activities like this event, for example. You know, people you haven't met before. You know, everybody's working this way, so one can reach out, and it's expected. You have a lot of positives as well, and it's embracing those positives around the situation. And then looking at the work-life boundaries, you know, this is for a lot of people has been really blurred, whether it's the time of day or the day of the week. So I think it's really important to recognize when people are setting limits, but also, you know, being able to share what you want to share and allowing people the time to get back to you with this type of environment that we're living in here. And then I think sometimes as well, in this very concentrated virtual environment, the language and cultural differences can be amplified. And it's important to kind of recognize when people are working in different ways and embracing that. I think it's also far more personal to see people in their own environments and their home environments and how they're a little bit more relaxed potentially. So, you know, embrace the differences as well, rather than seeing them as a barrier. And then the constant communication fatigue, you know, there's a lot of different ways that people can communicate. And as I said before, you know, recognize that sometimes it may be fine to do a call without video, or when it's not so many people, or that there may be other channels to communicate, and recognizing when that makes sense, and kind of how to manage that, and working on ways as a team, particularly as a leader, of, you know, who prefers what method and how do you get things done, makes things more manageable for people. So as we're looking through the box, I think some of these have come up for people that they've been experiencing, you know, whether it's working with the kids in the background, or having some homeschooling, or some of those colleagues who are living alone, or whatever health or other issues may be there. Lots of people around. You know, these are all different things that are happening in our different backgrounds, but this is part of our shared experience through this pandemic, and I hope that it makes us all a little bit more tolerant, a little bit more understanding of all the different roles that we as individuals play throughout the day and in our home and our work lives. And what I wanted to do here was also, you know, just highlight, you know, some of the areas where there could be misunderstandings, or things that don't work so well. You know, misunderstandings of asks and expectations. As a leader, it's really important to be clear on what you're asking people for. You know, really focusing on how you can build trust, being open in those conversations, and going that extra mile in those conversations to kind of know where people are in terms of their current state of mind, and different things that are happening. Lack of clarity or confusion on ownership. Again, it behooves us as leaders to make sure that our teams are oriented, and that we're all clear on what we're doing and what we're owning, and as individuals as well, that we're seeking that. And then managing conflict, recognizing that there's different types of conflict, and we need to work through that. And team disengagement, taking the time to even having unscripted calls. I think that's one of the things that I found myself has been really, really important to do during this time, is just having those one-on-ones with my team or with my leadership, where we're able to just have 30 minutes once a week or once every 2 weeks, where we can really just have an open discussion, no agenda, just get a few things out, and not let things brew. So, that's really important for keeping the team on track. And then setting some time for innovation and risk-taking, finding those topics and those ideas that people want to innovate around and want to spend a little bit more time exploring, and making sure that they have those feedback loops to do that. And then, really making sure that we're delivering the right results for our customers, right? So again, keeping very focused on that. And then, the long-term goals and personal development. I think it's really important in this time as well. I've seen people who have really been able to set aside that time and focus on their personal development, and others who just get overwhelmed by the number of appointments that get in. So it's, again, being very intentional about what that means, and ensuring that people are engaged and appreciated and valued in the working environment. So, these are all challenges, and I've talked a little bit about how to overcome them. But, it's really recognizing some of these actions that you can do. So, thinking about, how you can recognize where you are, what you're role modeling, what you're setting as your precedents, focusing on some of your strengths and your own biases, leaning in and learning about your own emotional intelligence, and trying to better understand kind of where you're coming from and what your background is, and reacting to certain things and getting a handle on that. And then lastly, really learning and being curious, right? So, there's a lot of information out there, and I'll have those resources here in this presentation at the end that you can refer to, just to learn about how to be more inclusive and open up your mind about different things that you might not have been aware of, and how that might help you in building trust and focusing on those relationships around you. And I think if we all take an action to kind of pick up the one or two things that we think are going to make a difference as to where we are in our journey, and what's relevant in our organization and for our own personal development, I think that's a great thing to look at after this session here. So, some of the other things here that you can look at in terms of how you can better work with your teams is thinking about these virtual offsites, really planning how you're going to work offsite. And there's a lot of tools out there that one can use to have meeting rooms and have these offsites and work collaboratively. Looking for cues. By now we're all pros at the different screens, so looking for cues and silences in conversation from different individuals to know that you might need to check in what might be happening there with them. Recognizing family circumstances and individual circumstances where might people need some more support. And then, as I said earlier in the discussion, start with some basic questions, to make sure that your team and your colleagues are in a good place as you're starting a discussion. Where are you? How are things going? Start with understanding where they are and making sure they've got the basics in terms of their psychological and physical needs being met within your team. So focus on the one or two things that are most relevant for you and your team as you're going forward here. And I think the other thing is, let's not be too hard on ourselves. Let's recognize this is a whole new world that we're living in, living with this pandemic, living with COVID. There's a lot of challenges. There's a lot of ambiguity. We don't know how things will be starting to ramp back up, the best thing we can do is just provide regular feedback, right? And frankly speaking, that's a lot of what we probably had more informally in a face-to-face environment, and now we're going to need to do that more intentionally in this virtual environment. And then, as I said before, having some informal team meetings, maybe share the responsibility amongst the team, that also helps everybody feel involved and engaged on how we're running meetings and how we're getting discussions going, and also thinking about leading those meetings. And then making sure, everybody's clear on the team and priorities and expectations and orders. What I want to do is just kind of close off here with some of our next steps and some of the materials that I said I would provide you as reference here. I've got a lot of links in here to a lot of good information that I've used in my journey as well here at AWS around inclusion and diversity and equity, and really helping myself to gain a better understanding of the different circumstances that my colleagues are in, that I myself may have been in, and really getting a better understanding of the topic area and how I can be more proactive in ensuring that I'm being a good leader, demonstrating good role model behavior, and just being a good listener and hopefully being a better human in the process. So with that, let me leave you with one of my favorite quotes, and that's from one of my favorite poets, Maya Angelou. I've learned that people who forget what you will forget what you say, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. So, it'd be great if we could get some feedback, and as I said, I've got a video here link for you as well, and I hope that this information has been valuable for you in your learning journey here. Thank you very much.